Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Jeff Cohen. We are back. We've had a little bit of a break here. Jeff was traveling. I have been doing a little bit of everything. I had an episode with Dylan Barnes a few weeks ago when Jeff was out of town, but Jeff is back. We are going to dive into a lot of things today. We've got a fun one today, I think, because there's some interesting stuff going on. The offseason has taken its time, right? Very slow-moving offseason. The White Sox signed Austin Slater to a one-year deal, something, right? Whatever, a depth outfielder signing. I don't need to spend too much time on that personally. But that was the one thing that's happened so far. None of the top free agents are among, Major League Baseball as a whole have really signed yet. It's been very slow kind of moving. Nothing's taken off quite yet. But in the meantime, it's time for mock trades. That's my favorite time of the year. I enjoy it. I love writing them. I love researching them. I love getting hate on them. I think it's just entertaining. I think, you really have written a good mock trade when you get people hating on them. I think that's how it comes down to. So today's main topic is going to be the Garrett Crochet mock trades piece that I just put out this morning for Just Baseball. So it's 5 mock trades for Crochet, all kind of a different angle in terms of what the package looked like. I tried to kind of give a different perspective of like the more high upside, younger prospect headline package, a package with more big league ready talent, ones that are kind of a blend of big league talent, prospect, project piece, right? So we'll get into that later, but that's going to be our main topic for today. First, we're going to start with the 40-man roster. It had to be finalized for the Rule 5 draft a few days ago. The White Sox made 2 additions to the 40-man roster, left off a few notable names as well. So we're going to dive into that first. But Jeff, how was your trip and how are you doing?
Trip was great. Went to Spain, had a blast, and nice to be back. This is the time of the year for baseball nerds, because we're going to see who gets added to the 40-man roster, who gets left off the 40-man roster, who gets DFA'd. Obviously there's a lot of speculation about Vaughn and Sheets. So I guess we'll find out sooner than later about that. So it's a fun time. You got the baseball winter meetings, and there's seems like there haven't been a lot of trades in recent owner meetings, but there seems to be a lot of speculation that that's going to be different this year.
Yeah, 100%. It seems like there's going to be a lot going on. I think it's going to really get going. I think to a degree, the market is sort of just hinging and waiting on Juan Soto. I think that it's pretty clear that he's, your pinnacle free agent, right? So I think a lot of things are going to start to come into play once he signs. I could see other things happening before that for sure, but I do think that kind of his market being set finally will change the direction of a team like the Yankees, the Mets, the Red Sox, right? Those are big players in the market. So I think when he decides, then it kind of creates the actual offseason plan for those teams that are in on him, right? So for the teams that legit think they have a chance at Soto, they can't really allocate stuff until they find out more of the direction he's going. So it really does change a lot. And I think the same thing can be said for some of the top pitchers, right? I think once one of a Snell, Burns, Fried decides to sign somewhere, then that pitching market will take off from there. I do think those 3 are kind of going to lead the pitching market, whichever direction it goes. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think, free agency is going to be fun this year, and the trade market's going to be fun. And for the White Sox, especially the trade market, because, they have a Garrett Crochet who ultimately is the best starting pitcher on the market, realistically on the market, at least from what we know at this point, right? So that's going to be a big talk of the offseason. But the White Sox, before you can even get to, fully thinking about trades and everything, right, you've got to consider what else they need to do before then to set up the young roster to be in place for next season, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the first step was the decision to add a couple of players and omit a couple of notable names from the 40-man.
Yeah, so it was a really fascinating thing. So for those who don't know the Rule 5 draft, for players that are, I believe players that are 19 or older, they have 4 years of team coverage before they can be taken in a Rule 5 draft. Once they're on, guys that sign at 18 or younger have 5 years, depending on when they were signed, right? So from when they were signed. So essentially, when a player reaches his spot of this is when he's Rule 5 eligible, you have to put them on the 40-man roster or else they can be taken in the Rule 5 draft. If a player is taken in the Rule 5 draft, they have to remain on the MLB roster for a team. Or if they get demoted, they are then sent back to the team that they started the previous offseason with, right? So for the White Sox, Colson Montgomery was the first one, absolute no-brainer, right? I don't care that he had a rough season. He's one of the top prospects on the team. He's one of the top prospects in the game, right? Like, there's no world in which you want Colson to be taken by another team. Of course, he's going to be on the White Sox Major League roster sooner than later anyways, so he had to be added, right? That was a given. We knew that was happening. They went in with 4 spots open, right? So prior to, and they could have DFA'd people, right? That's part of the issue I have here with with the scenario is there's a handful of guys still on the 40-man from last year that I don't see why they're on the 40-man, right? Like I don't really see the purpose for a handful. So going in with 36 is something, but it doesn't give you a lot of room. When they signed Austin Slater last week, that's another spot you then guaranteed on the 40-man, right? So then it's down to 37. If you want to take someone in the Rule 5 draft, which the White Sox have the first pick in, so they're going to want to take someone given that they can take from any team's non-40-man roster and select someone. Then you only have 38. There are 38 spots, 2 spots left. Colson Montgomery is a lock. Then you're in a position where there's 1 spot left. So it was almost like they sort of pigeonholed themselves here into making a tough decision with the pitching side of things, because there was a handful of pitchers that I think, could viably have been protected, and it would have made a lot of sense here. The White Sox opted for Juan Carela. Juan Carela was acquired last year from the Yankees. Young, exciting pitcher. I like Juan Carela a lot. He had a really strong finish to the season. He pitched well in the playoffs for Birmingham, reaching Double-A. I think he'll start in Double-A in that rotation once again next year. But Carela, as a 22-year-old starter who just got kind of his first taste of Double-A, his final 7 starts of the season, I don't think it was very likely he was going to get taken personally. I think that some teams might have banked on the stuff and tried to make him like a quick fix reliever at the big league level. But 7 games of Double-A experience as a 22-year-old, I'm not sure that's a guy that's getting taken in the draft, as opposed to 2 relief pitchers who I think are going to be part of the White Sox bullpen this year in Anthony Hoopy Tuinatoa and Trey Mago. Initial reaction to that, Jeff, when you had saw that they decided to protect Carela, protect Montgomery, but leave those 2 relievers that are league ready, frankly, off of the 40-man.
Well, you and I have talked a lot about potential candidates for the 2025 bullpen, and those were 2 names we were both really enthusiastic about. I mean, I think we were going to be surprised if at least one of them didn't make the opening day roster and the other came up during the season. So that was a bit of a surprise. But before we go any further, I'm curious, Elijah, who is currently on the 40-man roster who you see as dead weight?
I mean, it's interesting because I think there's guys that they wouldn't even – I think there's guys you could non-tender, first of all, and there's also guys you can DFA, right? I think Gavin Sheets is a pretty clear non-tender candidate. I don't really see how he's going to remain on this team. I think he's kind of – there's really not much more to tap into there, and I don't see at 29 years old at the beginning of the season that Gavin Sheets provides much for the White Sox, honestly. I think a Braden Shoemake could be a DFA candidate, acquired last year, but really had no signs of much of life last year, nothing that was that encouraging. I think, even going Corey Yolks, I think is a guy that, 29 years old going into the season. They picked him up last year off waivers, didn't show enough, in my opinion, to deserve a 40-man spot. Even going on the pitching side, I think Justin Anderson is a guy who, was okay at times, filled the spot, had some depth role, but 32 years old and is someone that, I don't see him as a long-term piece whatsoever. I think there's probably even more than that, to be honest. Enyel de los Santos, I think maybe you keep him around because the stuff is somewhat interesting, even though he had a rough year last year and you picked him up off waivers. Okay, sure. That's fine. Steven Wilson, I don't really see it. I think he's, 30 years old, had a really rough year, got demoted to AAA, right? I mean, that's already 4 or 5 guys I just named there. And you've got 2 25-year-old relievers who were really good at times. So I don't see the vision. I really don't see. I think it's just, at the end of the day, it's just being, I don't know. I really don't know what it is. I think the White Sox, either they have some reasons where they don't really believe in these 2 pitchers that much and they think they're, just depth relievers and nothing more than that, in which case, okay, sure. But even if they're 7th inning, 6th inning, solid pen arms, right? Like that's still more interesting than some of the guys that you're looking at that I just named on the 40-man. So I don't know.
Yeah, and quite frankly, all those guys that you named who are potential DFA candidates, I mean, there are 10 more guys like them out there that the White Sox could pick up if they're so inclined. We
100%.
saw it last year with Nick Sendell, Amaya. They're just cycling all these guys through. So
I don't quite get it. I mean, Trey Mago, right? Like I get he's 26, so somebody might not want to, take a 26-year-old in the Rule 5, but that's kind of the player you want, right? Trey Mago pitched 81 innings at a 1.9 ERA last year as a left-handed reliever. Like that's a guy you'd want in a Rule 5 draft because the whole point of the way teams operate in the Rule 5 draft is to get guys that are undervalued, stick them on your roster, and if they work, they work, and if they don't work, you send them back, and it's no loss. But for the White Sox, it's like, why, in your shoes where you're desperate to find major league talent that can stick, why are you risking a guy that can be a bullpen solid rock piece? Like I just don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't see the logic behind it. I think I will be surprised if one of, if not both of them, get taken because I won't be surprised. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really see it. I think think it's just a lack of, believing in some players within the own system to a degree, or just a lack of wanting to, make moves. And I don't know. I really don't get it. I think there is a lot of players that I would rather, get rid of than lose the Hoopy or a Mago. I mean, we'll see what happens there. I think it's interesting. I think the Rule 5 is going to be interesting. I also put out a tweet the other day of guys that I would target in the Rule 5 draft as the White Sox, right? I think the White Sox are in a position where, they have the first pick in the Rule 5 draft. They got punished in the actual draft, and they don't get to draft, top 10 in the actual draft because of MLB's rules on that. But the Rule 5 draft, they do have the first pick. There's a lot of pretty solid players in the Rule 5 draft, which is interesting. I've been following the Arizona Fall League pretty closely, and that's kind of given me even more perspective with some guys that are, the Arizona Fall League is often for teams, prospects that need more experience, like a Colson Montgomery, right? But it's also a testing ground for guys who needed to be added or not added to the 40-man typically, right? So that's the perfect time to get another taste of a guy before you have to add them to the 40-man or not, if they're going to be Rule 5 eligible. So there's a handful of guys that pitched in their Fall League this year, or, there's one or two hitters, but the hitting crop is a little bit weaker for sure. A lot of those guys get protected, but there's some arms that I really like. Josh Steffen from Texas, Zach Messenger from the Yankees, Griff McGarry from the Phillies, Ian Bedell from the Cardinals. There's a handful of guys that I definitely, you can check out my tweet if you're more interested in some of those names, but there's some interesting guys. So on the bright side of potentially losing one of those guys, I do think they're going to add a pretty exciting, interesting player to the active roster that, is someone that's not going to have big league experience yet, but could emerge as a big league piece potentially.
Yeah, you're right. But I think we both agree in a perfect world, you add those two and you pick up an exciting arm.
100%. I completely agree with you. So
it's perplexing. It's perplexing for sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We'll see what happens. I'm ready to see what happens in the draft, but at the same time, I don't really understand the logic there. And even if it was, I guess you don't want to risk it because you like the upside, but even if it was protecting one of those guys over a Carela, honestly, I really don't think Carela gets taken in the Rule 5 draft if he's eligible. I just think he's a little too young and a little too raw still, where he has good stuff, but I don't see a world where he sticks on a major league roster with where he's at currently in his development. So I don't know. I guess you see him as more of a long-term piece. You don't want to risk it at all. Fine. But it just doesn't quite make sense to me. So the White Sox 40-man roster is at 39 players. They're going to take somebody in the Rule 5 draft. There's a chance they non-tender some guys between now and then, in which case that'd be interesting to see. But that's where we're at right now. 39 guys on the 40-man locked up there. So that's interesting. Let's get into some Garrett Crochet talk, because that's what I really want to dive into today, because I'm excited for this. Mock trades are my absolute favorite thing to write. As someone who's been writing, baseball stuff for a few years now, I love writing mock trades every year when it's the deadline, and then when it's the off season. Like, that's the number one type of article I want to write. And I think I'm going to end up writing some Luis Robert ones here in the next few weeks, because I don't think they're going to trade him, but might as well write them because they're fun. But in the meantime, Garrett Crochet one. I worked on this for a while. I really debated on some teams, because I do think there's about 10 teams that could viably be in play for a Crochet, because in the offseason, it gives some of the smaller market teams the opportunity to reevaluate, to reassess, to see where their prospects are at, and to figure out, hey, we don't have the money to sign Corbin Burns, so let's try and trade for a guy that has 2 years of control at a very affordable price. Garrett Crochet is not going to make a ton of money. He's not going to be, super demanding. Yes, there's some injury risk. Yes, there's some risk in the fact that he's only been a starter for one season. With that said, every pitcher in baseball is risky, Jeff, right? I think that was one thing I kind of pointed out at the beginning of my articles. There is risk there, 100%, and probably more risk than a lot of other pitchers. But every single pitcher in baseball has arm concerns these days, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's an epidemic right now, and it's interesting. You just wonder if teams are going to be reluctant to give out those kind of Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, Steven Strasburg huge contracts anymore.
Right. It's hard, especially to pitchers. I think it's really hard to justify it at this point. I think it's going to be telling to see what Burns and Snell get, especially, and even Fried as well. Fried's had a little more injury concern, but with all those guys, do you really want to commit 7-8 years to a pitcher that's already 30 years old and already has a lot of wear on their arm and a lot of innings thrown? All those guys have thrown a lot of innings in the big leagues already. Right. Is that I'm curious, because I think Burns probably gets the most years because he's a year younger, and he's also got a little bit more life in his arm maybe, but I still don't see, I think 7's probably the cap. I think it's more teams are going to try to go for 5-6. I don't think guys want to do more than 6 years for a pitcher.
I think you just got to go shorter term, bigger,
higher AAV, yeah.
Average value, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So for that sake, right, if teams are scared of that, Garrett Crochet is projected to make $3 million in arbitration this year. So that's, one of the top 20 pitchers in baseball from this past season that you're getting at $3 million. If he has another great season, he's still only going to make $6 to $7 million in 2026, right? So that's $10 million, let's say, for 2 years of an ace all-star level pitcher if he's pitching at his best. Sure, there's a chance he gets hurt and he goes down next year and he misses all of next season and half of the year after, right? Like that is a viable possibility. But that's a risk you got to take for some of these teams. And it's a risk you got to take to get a top-end pitcher.
And it's an inexpensive risk, right? I mean, you're not committing, 7 years, $200 million to some free agent pitcher. You're spending next to nothing.
But you are having to commit prospect capital. And that's where I want to start. Before we get into each exact trade, the way I want to frame this is kind of what does a deal in terms of value standpoint look like? Because I think it's really easy for White Sox fans to look at this market and say, hey, we want 2 top 50 prospects in baseball, another top 100, and a throw-in piece flyer. That's not going to happen. I'm sorry. Right. I know people want that. It's not going to happen. I don't see any world where there's more than 2 top 100 prospects involved in this trade. I don't see it. With 2 years of control, with the level of risk involved, it's not happening. Right. So from there, let's break it down. The way that I think the White Sox want to structure a deal and the way that I think a team would be comfortable taking on a Crochet trade would be in the form of one legit headline piece, right? A legit prospect who's a top 100 piece that you can see as a future high-level starting MLB player, right? The second piece being either a prospect or a young big leaguer who is big league ready, right? So I think the second piece, you want one piece that is, whether they're a prospect still or they're in the bigs already, you want one piece that's young and can be a major league starter in Chicago this year. And that headline prospect also might be that player, right? That could overlap a little, right? But those are the 2 starting points you have to get in a trade. Right. And then you definitely want a young, projectable upside piece that you can develop, right? You want a guy like, Joel Perez is a good example of that. I know people don't like that trade and are very angry about the Fedde Kopech trade, but Joel Perez is an upside piece, right? He's a 19-year-old. You like the projection offensively. You see things that could happen. So the way I see it is one headline prospect, one big league ready prospect or young big league player, and then a third project piece with potentially a 4th flyer involved, depending on those first 3, right? But that is the general structure I see for a trade. And I think it's really easy to be unrealistic. And I tried my best in this article to really break down 5 trades that were different types of trades that fit those needs, but were accurate to that value.
Right. Right. No, I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. Those days of, unless, you get a desperate AJ Preller or something, those trades are not going to happen anymore. Sending all those prospects for a player. But you're right. They've got to get one guy who's either in the bigs or he's just on the doorstep. And, the way I looked at it, I went through the major league rosters and the AAA farm teams to see who jumped out at me as a major league guy. And I was really focused on a middle infielder thinking second base and a corner outfielder thinking right field. That's what I was really looking for.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a little hard to get both. I think one of the 2. One of the 2. Okay, yeah, I got you. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. That's what you want to be doing. So I'm going to start with an interesting one because I think this is kind of I view this trade as the most well-rounded from the perspective of what I just described. Right? I think it exactly fits what I described in terms of like a big league piece that's already kind of, is going to be a big league piece, a prospect you hope for and can be ready in a year or 2, right? And then that project piece that you're excited about. So I'm going to start with the Boston Red Sox, which is an interesting one because this is not a contender necessarily, right? What I think is fascinating about the Red Sox is teams – they're one of the teams in this list that wasn't even a playoff team. They're the only, one of the 2 teams on this list, right? But I do think they are just well set up to strike. They have a really strong farm system of hitters, especially, which fits the White Sox needs. They have too many hitters, frankly, to fill their roster this season. They need pitching. They have a whole new regime of pitching development that they really believe in, and they really believe they're trending in the right direction in the pitching side, but they need that stud to anchor that to boost that rotation and boost the entire pitching staff. Wilyer Abreu was the first guy that jumps out at me because Wilyer Abreu, coming off a rookie season, which I think he finished 4th in Rookie of the Year or 5th in Rookie of the Year in the American League, but Gold Glove in right field, instantly the best right fielder defensively the White Sox have had in a decade plus for sure.
Yep.
Becomes a guy that, it seems some people think he could play some center, if Robert were to be traded eventually. I don't really see him as a center fielder. I see him as an elite right fielder, but I'm good with that. Like the White Sox need a right fielder, especially because the next guy I'm going to mention in this package is a center fielder. So, an elite right fielder, a guy that you can plug and play. He's your immediate starter. You run out an outfield with Wilyer Abreu starting in right field this year. Awesome. Great. He's young. He's talented. Cool. Then I go and look at the Red Sox, and this is where it gets a little tricky because it's hard to gauge exactly how they value a Wilyer Abreu. The Red Sox have 4 top 50 MLB prospects that are hitting. Kyle Teal, I don't think makes sense. He's a catcher. Roman Anthony is the number 1 prospect in all of baseball. According to Just Baseball, he's top 3 consensus prospect. That's not happening. Marcelo Meyer, Christian Campbell, 2 middle infielders that I definitely considered here. But I kind of just don't quite see it working. I think Meyer is a guy that the Red Sox want to hold. I think they have a spot for him. And I think Christian Campbell being so big league ready, he's coming off of like a massive breakout season too. Some swing concern there. I'm not a huge Christian Campbell fan personally. I also just think his proximity to the big leagues makes the Red Sox not want to trade an Abreu and a Campbell. So then I go to their next prospect. And their next prospect from there is a guy that the White Sox were very much considering drafting before that Hagen Smith pick last year with that 5th overall pick. He was definitely in play there at 5 before the White Sox decided to just go the pitching route and lean into that. Braden Montgomery, outfielder from Texas A&M, center field, coming off, he got hurt before the draft. He broke his ankle and that kind of tanked his stock a little bit. He ended up falling into past the first 10 picks. He was a projected top 10 pick for pretty much the entire collegiate season before he got his injury, right? So this is a guy that was a consensus first round, no doubt prospect coming into the draft. Essentially, the White Sox get another first round draft pick in the 2024 draft with a Braden Montgomery. You basically get 2 top 10-ish picks in the draft. And Montgomery's a guy that profiles as a legit outfielder, a lot of power, a lot to like there, well-rounded game. I think those two as the lead of a package makes a lot of sense.
It's just so our listeners know, you and I didn't compare notes ahead of time. And I got to tell you, after I did my research, the number 1 trade and the number 1 team was the Red Sox and Abreu Montgomery. That's exactly where I ended up because they've got the young hitters and they can spare at least one of those corner outfielders.
100%. Yeah.
And, if what you're saying is true, that they could get both of them, I would do that tonight.
And then from there, because the Red Sox aren't giving up their top 4 guys, right? They have this big 4 prospects I just mentioned, right? Because they're not giving that up, then the White Sox can attack that third aspect of what I was describing earlier, which is a young project piece with a lot of upside. Is going to be a while, but you have upside to dream on and you have something to be excited about. I went with Franklin Arias because I think a shortstop would be awesome to add. It could also be a Yolani Cespedes or a Miguel Bleis if you want to just triple down on the outfielders. But I think Arias makes the most sense. Franklin Arias is a guy who, is a high-end prospect. Yeah, it's going to take a lot of time, but it's a shortstop profile. It seems like he's going to, legit be in the shortstop mix to stay there potentially, right? So that's a guy who I think is, going to have a real chance to be a long-term high-level middle infielder. It's going to take some time. But that's the third piece you want in a trade like this. You want that third piece who can be, long-term, right? He's 19 years old. He's a legit shortstop. He plays a good shortstop, supposedly. It seems like he's, going to stick at shortstop, right? That's the third piece you want. I added on a flyer here just because of the aspect of them not giving up any of their top 4. With that said, I think Abreu Montgomery are good enough, in my opinion, that you don't really need a 4th piece in here. I added Connelly early just because I like him. He's a fun left-handed, kind of young left-handed starter who I think, it fits the White Sox mold of what you'd want in a flyer. But really the package is centered around an Abreu, a Montgomery, and a Franklin Arias as, 2 legit prospects within the Red Sox system, and Abreu who would immediately start in right field for the White Sox.
And again, you think that is doable because it doesn't include any of their top 4 prospects, because Abreu and Montgomery would be a great return.
And I think it doesn't really hurt them. They have too many outfielders right now. They don't know who to start in the outfield, going into next year. I think Christian Campbell, like I mentioned, has also played some outfield. So he's a guy that they're even considering moving into the outfield, right? They have a lot of options in the outfield. Roman Anthony is going to be their immediate starter probably to start this season. He's the best prospect in baseball right now, right? As an outfielder. So it's like, they have the flexibility where they don't need Abreu. They really, he's a luxury, but they have a tight situation there in terms of offense. And an Arias is too far out, right? Arias, was dominant in the rookie. Arias, for reference, for people listening, had a 1055 OPS in rookie ball this season, got up to single A, only had a 700 OPS in single A, right? So like he's very young, still needs time. It's going to take him time to develop. He'd be in Kannapolis for most of the season, hypothetically, right? But A lot to like. Yeah, that'd be fun for you for sure. Arias is super, super fun watch, so that would be cool. But he's a legit shortstop. He's got a lot of good contact and speed. There's a lot to like there. It's a package that makes sense. This is probably my favorite package overall. I think there's other deals that make sense, and I think this deal to some people would turn them off because there's not that blue chip prospect, right? When you look at a farm system and you see these, these Marcelo Meyer, this Roman Anthony, right, Christian Campbell even, right, and none of those are involved, I think people's mind goes like, why are we not getting a top prospect? And it's like, okay, let's take a step back. Wilyer Abreu was a top 100 prospect and is coming off a very good rookie year. He's proven it in the big leagues already that he's a good player. Braden Montgomery, first round draft pick. Yeah, he's back half of the top 100 right now, but like that's a first round draft pick that just got drafted and has a ton of potential. And Franklin Arias was a high level international signing who was one of the best hitters in rookie ball this season.
And again, there's less risk because they're closer to the major leagues. And
Right.
It's going to be really tough with all the other teams that we're going to talk about, finding two guys who are that close to the major leagues and have that kind of upside.
Yeah, 100%. So
Yep.
That's the Boston trade. I like it a lot. I think it makes a lot of sense. Staying in the division with Boston, the Orioles one is really tough to figure out because the Orioles, and this is where I think I had some people that were not happy about this offer because I get it and I understand why. The Orioles one is tricky because the Orioles have two prospects who are exceptional, and they have two guys who are, top 10 prospects in baseball, probably top 20 consensus for sure. But I don't believe the Orioles are going to trade any of the top guys. They've proven time and time again in the last few years that they are not willing to trade their top guys. They refuse. And I think it's going to bite them because I've been on record saying that I think the Orioles are in a really tricky spot because they're going to have to deal with, Gunnar Henderson's free agency in a few years. They've got Adley Rutschman coming up on, the end of his arbitration, right? Like they're in a really tough spot, honestly. They truly are in a really tough position. But with that said, they still have the depth in their farm system to put together a package. Where it differs here, as opposed to the Red Sox offer, is I don't think there's a headliner in this deal unless you're including Kobe Mayo, Samuel Basallo, their top two prospects. There's a world where they decide to part with a Samuel Basallo because they have Adley Rutschman catching. If they decide they're going to pony up and pay Adley Rutschman, they have first base already kind of figured out. They have a lot of first base options. If they decide they don't have room for Basallo, maybe it's just Basallo and one second piece, and that's the deal. And that could be. The White Sox would also be putting a lot of stock into one young player. That is a risky thing to do. I like Samuel Basallo. I think he's an absolute stud offensively. Putting your entire trade package for your ace and your best asset essentially into one elite prospect is risky business.
No, I hear you completely. Absolutely.
So
I'm curious, what do you think about Beavers and Bradfield?
That's where I went, right? So I went with instead of the deal of, one of those top end guys with a second piece hedging a lot on one young guy, I went with Enrique Bradfield, who was a 2023 first rounder, Dylan Beavers, who was a former high draft pick, right? Both outfielders, both probably a year out from the big leagues potentially. I actually think Beavers is probably closer, frankly. Beavers, I forgot. Beavers finished the year in AAA. He played only 6 games there, but he's probably, it's interesting. The profile for Beavers is a little bit more of like your fourth outfielder. He's maybe an average starter if he goes there. It's a well-rounded game, right? It's some hit, some power, pretty good fielder in the outfield, can run a little bit for sure. There's upside there, but I don't think there's star upside there. I think that's one of the reasons the White Sox might be hesitant with that. Beavers is going to get on base. He's going to steal some bags. He's going to hit a few, he's going to hit some doubles. He hits well in the gaps, right? But it's not necessarily a star upside. Whereas Bradfield, not at all a power guy, right? Very minimal power. But Bradfield, you've got the upside for a legit leadoff hitter every single day center fielder, right? So that's the interesting thing with Bradfield, where he finished the season in Double A. He played 27 games in Double A to finish the year, had a 791 OPS there. Do you know how many steals Enrique Bradfield had on the total in the season between High A and Double A last year?
I don't, but I'm sure it's a big number.
Take a guess.
60.
74.
Wow.
74 stolen bases for Enrique Bradfield. And that's only in 108 games. He missed part of the season with an injury as well. So Bradfield was on pace for over 100 steals if he'd played the entire season in the minors. Pretty interesting there. In addition to being, really tooled out hitting wise, elite run, seems like he's going to be an elite center fielder potentially. So it's not your powerful upside, right? He's not going to hit a bunch of homers. He's listed at 35 power. That might be generous. He might even be a 30 power guy, to be honest. But Enrique Bradfield is going to get on base a ton. He's going to play an elite center field, and he's going to steal a ton of bags. When's the last guy the White Sox had a true disruptor on the bases?
Yeah.
Don't really remember, right? So it's a different type of package. And then the third guy I went with as kind of the key third piece was Cade Povich, which is interesting because I didn't want to target pitching in this deal, but the Orioles have a pair of young pitchers in Cade Povich and Chase McDermott, who both kind of are big league ready. The White Sox have this thing going on with lefties where they're whatever is going on with the organization in Bannister, the lefty development has been very, very good. Povich is a guy that you could immediately slot into Crochet's rotation spot. And there's some intrigue there. I think he could be a legit four-starter, right? I don't think it's a high upside guy, but if he's your third piece and you're getting two potentially good outfielders in addition to a Povich who can go right into your rotation and I think could be at least a solid mid-rotation starter, it becomes an interesting package. People aren't going to like this because there's no headliner per se. Enrique Bradfield listed as the 71st prospect in baseball by Just Baseball. It's something, right? But it's not a headliner. I added in Creed Williams because of that. Creed Williams is a guy that is a catcher first base combo, is someone who I think could be, it could be something, right? I think he had a strong Arizona Fall League. He played well this fall. I think he doesn't really have a spot in Baltimore. He could be, a first base platoon catcher type option for the White Sox. It's an interesting deal. Everything changes if the Orioles are willing to trade a Samuel Basallo. I don't think they do, in which case this is about the best I think the White Sox could get from the Orioles.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you substituted Vance Honeycutt for Dylan Beavers.
I thought about it. I thought about that as well. I think the Orioles would be hesitant to trade. I think they'd be a little hesitant to trade their back-to-back first rounders just because that's kind of something teams don't tend to do. But I definitely considered that, and I mentioned Honeycutt in the article as well. But I do think Honeycutt is a little more exciting. That being said, Honeycutt does have a lot of swing and miss concerns. There's definitely some questions there with the Honeycutt in terms of if he'll ever actually hit enough. So that's if you want to get a little more upside though, Honeycutt over Beavers I think is the power speed combo, right? Honeycutt's very fast. He has a lot of powerful upside. So that's kind of the other alternative there as a guy that could fit in that deal. But I think some combination of a Bradfield, a Honeycutt, a Beavers, a Povich could make some sense. And I can see it happening, even though I don't like it quite as much as some of these other trades I put together.
No, I agree. I think it pales dramatically from the Red Sox package.
Yeah.
I'd have to really think long and hard if I was Chris Getz, if that was going to be the return.
Right.
Because we're going to get into a couple other teams, and I think there are some other interesting packages.
Right. So then let's go to a deal that I consider to be kind of back along the lines of that initial description I gave, right? An elite prospect, a big league ready talent, and a project. And, guess who? The Los Angeles Dodgers really fit that mold. And they fit exactly – they can put together a package that is pretty much to a T what I described at the beginning of this segment, right? It's a big league – it's a really high-level prospect, a big league ready piece that fills a hole the White Sox need to fill, and then a project who you can get really excited about if you look into the numbers and you give it a second to kind of consider it. The Dodgers package starts with Dalton Rushing. It has to. And that is probably – honestly, I know people don't like the idea of a first base – somewhat catcher still, acquisition as your headliner. Dalton Rushing's probably the best overall hitter of anybody we're mentioning in this, all these trades, right? Like in terms of pure offensive output, he might be the best hitter on this list. In which case,
played the outfield. I think
he did.
You're the one that put me off to that.
The Dodgers tested him in left field at the end of the season. In my opinion, the left field thing was a showcase. I think the Dodgers wanted to kind of raise his value by saying, hey, this guy can play the outfield. Of course he can play the outfield. I don't know if he sticks in the outfield. Dalton Rushing's a big dude. He's a big dude, and I'm not sure it works. I think he's athletic enough where it could, and the White Sox would try it. But ultimately, are we really letting Andrew Vaughn stop him from just being the everyday first baseman that matches? Because I think Dalton Rushing has a lot more offensive upside at this point in his career than Andrew Vaughn does. He's only 23 years old. He's done nothing but hit at the minor league levels. Last year had an 896 OPS overall in the season with a 907 once he got promoted to AAA. 26 homers on the year, almost 100 RBIs. 64 walks to 103 strikeouts, right? Like he has a really good approach generally for a guy that has that much power. The bat is exciting. There's point blank. I don't care what people say. And people don't like, for whatever reason, it seems like a lot of people don't like the idea of Rushing as the headliner just because the first base catcher thing. The dude can mash. Like that is a flat out headline prospect who will hit immediately.
No, I agree. That's the second best trade I came up with was him as the headliner.
Right. And then it goes to that league-ready prospect in Alex Freeland. Alex Freeland, I don't love the profile. I don't know if Alex Freeland is necessarily I don't know if he's a star player, right? But He could immediately be starting it for the White Sox at shortstop or second base or third base, frankly, depending on the way. He's got a really good arm, actually. So depending on how the White Sox infield shakes out, he's another guy to add into the mix, right? He adds into that mix of Colson, Ramos, Brooks Baldwin, Miguel Vargas. He becomes another one of those, like, let's see it in spring training. And if you prove it, you'll make the team, basically. I think that's basically the way the entire infield's going to shake out now is like, if you come up to spring training and you perform, if any of those guys I just mentioned, you're going to make this team and you're going to get starts, right? It's really an open competition at this point for those three, the entire second, third, shortstop kind of, range of the infield, right? So Alex Freeland's a guy, 23 years old. You can say, oh, he didn't perform great at the higher levels of the minors. This year, he comes into the season, he has an 11-11 OPS in high A, gets promoted pretty quickly, goes to Tulsa AA, 792 OPS, still maintains, a really good plate discipline, steals a lot of bases, finishes the year with another 39 games in AAA, right? So he made it through 3 levels this season. Total stats on the year across 136 games, 32 doubles, 18 home runs, 91 walks, to 133 strikeouts and 31 stolen bases. He has 31 stolen bases for the last 2 years in a row, both seasons. It's speed, it's power, it's pretty good contact, it's a good plate approach. He takes his walks, he's patient at the dish. It's just a well-rounded infielder. I don't think he's a star. I think he's probably an average starter or a rotational utility, something maybe, but he's a big league hitter, and I think he's pretty ready to be a big league hitter. So in this trade, you get the marquee prospect and you get the secondary prospect, who are both probably going to play in the majors this year, and the Dodgers don't have room for, right? Like, the reality is the Dodgers, unless the Dodgers want to make Alex Freeland their everyday shortstop, which they're not going to do, they're going to go sign Willy Adames probably because of the Dodgers. They don't really have room for these guys. Will Smith just signed a massive extension. He's locked up as the catcher in LA. Freddie Freeman's obviously playing first base. Shohei Ohtani's obviously DHing, right? So unless they really think Dalton Rushing's their left fielder, which I still think they're going to re-sign Teoscar too, by the way. So, I don't think they really have room for these two. And then the White Sox can say, hey, like, you didn't want to trade us Josue De Paula or Zaire Hope, right? I mentioned these two guys in the article. These two, Josue De Paula is 19, both Josue and Zaire Hope are 19-year-old outfielders. They are the two prospects in the Dodgers system that I think they're going to be the least likely to trade, because I think both those guys have superstar upside, and the Dodgers very rarely deal the guys that have superstar upside. Their third player, I think, has superstar upside, is the third piece I included here. And I think it might be a little too rich of me to ask for, but I think because you're not trading for a De Paula or a Zaire Hope, they could ask for an Emil Morales. Emil Morales is a 18-year-old shortstop in rookie ball. This year in the Dominican League rookie ball, he had Dominican League numbers. Let's take it with a grain of salt, right? But an 1190 or 1169 OPS with 14 homers, 46 RBIs, 40 walks to 45 strikeouts, and that's only in 46 games, right? So 25 extra base hits in 46 games. He slugged almost 700, right? Like, again, Dominican League, summer ball, rookie ball, super hard to gauge what numbers mean there. But from all indications, Emil Morales has legit hit tool and power elite combination of potential. I think, yeah.
I'm sorry. So back to Sweeney's numbers, just to put those numbers in perspective.
Freeland.
How thrilled we would be if those were Colson's numbers in AAA this year.
Right. 100%.
Yep.
So it's not the upside of Colson, right? But you're getting two guys ready. And then Emil Morales is a guy that is super high upside. You could swap in a Yohendry Vargas here, I think, is maybe a little more realistic. Vargas is a year older, a little bit less upside probably than Morales, but still had a 900 OPS in Arizona Complex League this year. And it's a guy that also has that kind of hit tool power combination. So I think a Vargas, a Morales, or even maybe an Eduardo Quintero, those are the three Dodgers, like, young, high upside guys right now that are, looked at as projects still, but very, very high upside. One of those three, in addition to a Rushing and a Freeland, would be an excellent package in my eyes.
Elijah, if we have said that the goal is to get one major league ready player, but if the Dodgers surprised Chris Getz and said, all right, pick between De Paula and Hope, or Hope,
Deal.
You'd do that in a heartbeat.
Deal button. I'm slamming it immediately. Okay. Immediately. I think one of those two, in terms of upside, would be just about as high of an upside player as you could possibly get in a Crochet trade. If they don't want to give Rushing and they see Rushing as an everyday starter and they say, we'll do De Paula, Freeland, and a project, immediately slamming yes. I do not. That's the type of player you throw the need out the window for. And you say, this is the upside guy that we need. And the White Sox are in a position right now where they have to take a swing if they have a chance at a top 50 type upside guy, right? Like, if you're given the opportunity to go for a guy with that level of upside, you have to take it. Like, I can't emphasize that enough, that all of this stuff I've said about fit, you throw it out the window if you're given a chance at a truly elite upside prospect.
Okay, so would you take that deal over the Montgomery Abreu
That's
deal?
tough. This is where it becomes tough. I really like both the Boston and Dodgers deals, and I think they're both realistic because I think they both
Mhm.
are good, but they also are realistic about what those teams need and what those teams are willing to give up. I don't know. I think it'd be close. I think it would really depend on who that third piece for the Dodgers is. I think if it's and same thing, both teams. I think it would depend on which project you want. If the project, if you're cool with an Arias, okay, sure. But if the Dodgers say, oh, we'll give Vargas, but we're not going to give Morales, then it's like, which one of the, I mean, it really comes down to the ultimate evaluation of who that project piece is, because I do think a Rushing Freeland versus a Montgomery Abreu is pretty similar. I think I like Rushing's upside a little more than any of those other three guys involved, but then the project piece comes into play. I think both those deals are two deals that I would be very content taking as
Yeah.
Chris gets in this
Those
situation.
were my top two deals, the top two teams.
So
Absolutely.
we'll get into these last two because the next one I don't love. I just wanted to provide it for an example. And then the last one I actually kind of really like, even though it's going to piss off some White Sox fans. So the next one is the Phillies. And the Phillies are an interesting case. They're kind of like the Orioles, but a little bit more simplistic. Andrew Painter is not getting traded. There's no world, not happening. Sorry. Aiden Miller, the Phillies' top, top hitting prospect, right? Consensus top 50 in baseball, was a first round pick a year ago out of high school. I like Aiden Miller. Not to harp on anybody negatively, but when the White Sox in 2023 drafted Jacob Gonzalez, I had Aiden Miller projected at that pick. I really wanted Aiden Miller at that pick. I think Aiden Miller is a stud. I think he's going to be an everyday third baseman for a decade plus. I don't think the Phillies trade him. If the Phillies were to trade him and be willing to trade him in a Crochet deal, then it looks something like the Basayo possibility, where it's like Aiden Miller, a second decent prospect, cool, call it a day. You're putting a lot into one prospect. The other alternative with the Phillies is to just go for the upside. Just forget the league ready and just say, we're going to shoot for the sky. We're going to get two guys that have elite potential. They've got a long way to go, but we're not competing for a few years. So let's just take a chance and see what happens, right? That possibility would involve Eduardo Tate and Starling Caba. Eduardo Tate and Starling Caba, both super young, a long way to go, but both consensus top 100 guys with a ton of potential, a catcher and a shortstop. It's funky. It's weird to make your two top guys like 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, right? Like that's risky for sure. It's the most risky package here, I would say, by a mile. Do I love the upside of both those guys, though? I do, right? I do. Eduardo Tate just turned 18, too. Eduardo Tate was 17 for most of this year and finished the season between rookie ball and single A. He finished the season with an 842 OPS, 11 home runs, 18 doubles, and that's only in 79 games total. Starling Caba is heralded as probably one of the best defensive shortstops in like the entire minor league system right now of any team, right? He's listed as a 65 field. I think he's going to be a 75 or 70 fielder, honestly, when everything's said and done. High level shortstop at 18 years old, was good in rookie ball with the bat, really struggled in single A, still incredibly young, just turned, is whatever. That's the upside swing. I finished out that package with Gabriel Rincones, Michael Mercado, two kind of league ready, an outfielder. Rincones could be a right field option for the White Sox this year. Mercado is just a depth kind of arm to stack into the mix of arms. This package is probably the worst, I think most people would say, in comparison to these other ones. But in terms of upside, you've got two 18-year-olds who could be very, very good by the time the White Sox are ready to compete.
The thing that appeals to me in that deal is having an elite shortstop, and
Yeah.
that bumps Colson to third, and I think he would be an elite defensive third baseman. All of
Yeah.
a sudden, you have dramatically improved your White Sox defense,
Right.
and you're saving
But
runs
it's a
now.
long time away too, so you never know.
No,
Right.
I know, but
But
still,
yes.
if you can have a guy who's a 70 grade defensive shortstop and then Colson at third, that's really strong. That's going to
Right.
save you a run a game.
100%. That deal could also include a Justin Crawford. I think there's a chance if they're saving Evan Miller that Justin Crawford could be that third piece. And Justin Crawford is, got up to Double A this year, had a lot of success in Double A. Son of Carl Crawford, super speedy, contact-based outfielder for sure. Not a lot of power with Crawford. I don't love Crawford's profile, but I do think that if there's a chance, that's the piece, right? It's a ton of stolen bases, it's good contact skills. Maybe that's your third piece, and then it's you're getting the Phillies' third, fourth, and fifth prospects at that point. maybe that's appealing. I think that's very viable in this trade as well. I just decided to go with a Rincones, who's a little bit lower level of a similar thing to Crawford, where it's,
Yeah.
an outfielder who's near league ready, but Rincones has a little bit more power intrigue there, as opposed to a Crawford who's more contact oriented. But generally, the idea there is going all in on the youth, going for two high upside guys. The last trade is with the Cubs. And I know people don't like hearing that because White Sox fans hate the idea of trading with the Cubs, but they shouldn't hate the idea of trading with the Cubs because, the last few trades the White Sox and Cubs have made have gone pretty well for the White Sox. I know things didn't go well in terms of like the future of the organization, but getting Dylan Cease and Eloy Jimenez for Jose Quintana is still one of the better trades from the White Sox, recent history, right?
Sure.
The Cubs have a similar situation to the Red Sox. They're not contenders yet, but they have a lot of offensive core young pieces. Their farm system is filled with offense. I believe when I looked at the Cubs, they only have 2 pitchers in their top 15 prospects. And the other 13 are hitters, with 7 or 8 of them being like pretty much big league ready. The Cubs have too many hitters that they don't know what to do with their hitting right now. I mean, they're in a situation where they're going to try and potentially trade Cody Bellinger because they don't even have room for all their young outfielders. They've got PCA, they've got all these other guys that have come up. I mean, they've got Suzuki still, they've got Happ still. They are just stacked with outfielders, in which case there's a guy they've got in terms of upside, power upside at least, that could be one of the best players we've talked about today, in Owen Casey. Owen Casey is a guy who I think, there's definitely some swing and miss concern there. But Owen Casey is possibly the best prospect the Cubs could offer in terms of just power offensive upside. He's listed as Just Baseball's 35th overall prospect, and I think the Cubs don't have room for him. And I think he plugs into right field immediately for the White Sox. He could play center field potentially. I think he's more of a right fielder though. And he's probably just about one of the better right fielders you could get in terms of a league-ready prospect with a lot of upside. Casey mashes. He's going to hit home runs. There's a lot to like there.
Right. And like you said, there are so many other bats that they can add to that package to make it so enticing. It's interesting. Again, when I was doing my research, one of the things I did is just, look at teams that had players of interest. And I had 3 teams, the Cubs, the Mariners, and the Guardians. And I thought all these teams have really interesting prospects, and many of them are in the upper levels, but I don't think, I just can't see any of them making a deal. Certainly Seattle or Cleveland making a deal.
Right. The Cubs are the one I can see, though. That's the thing. I think the Cubs want to compete this year, and I think they have too many. They have too many hitters. They don't know what to do with their hitters, in which case they got to trade some of them. And I think Casey's the one you trade. I think Matt Shaw is the other one I consider, right? Matt Shaw is their top infield prospect, but I do think they're going to try and find a role for Shaw. I think they're going to try and figure out how to get him into their lineup. I think they like him a little bit more than Casey. I think he's a little bit more well-rounded of a hitter. But Casey, 19 homers and 29 doubles this year in AAA, 71 walks as well. 156 strikeouts is a little bit concerning, right? He does whiff a lot, but it's serious power upside, and a guy that's pretty much ready. I mean, he's 22 still. He's very young still, but still pretty ready to be a big leaguer in the near future. Now, he had an entire season in AAA this past year at 21, then 22 years old, right? So Casey's the headliner. Then I went with that upside, high-level potential prospect, right? That's Jefferson Rojas is who I went with here. Jefferson Rojas is a guy that I think there's a wide range of opinions on within the industry, but generally he's a legit shortstop. So that's another thing we like to see there. He's a legit defensive shortstop. I've mentioned that a lot in these packages, but I think the White Sox getting a marquee defender is going to be something they would like to get. He had a rough year offensively. He spent the entire year in high A and definitely had some ups and downs. But even with the ups and downs, he doesn't strike out a ton. He makes really good contact generally. He gets on base at a good clip. He has some speed. He steals some bags. And I think there's more room for him to grow there in terms of his offensive impact. But it's at the very least a contact-oriented, great defensive shortstop. And then the third piece I decided to go with was kind of that upside swing, the we'll see what happens. And I went with a pitcher here, actually, even though their system is super loaded with hitters. I think it easily could be a hitter. It could be like a Pedro Ramirez here or a Christian Hernandez. Those are 2 infield prospects the Cubs have that are in the lower levels. But I went with Jackson Wiggins, and this was a recommendation actually from RM Layton. So I got to give RM some credit here when I was talking about some packages with him. He kind of recommended Jackson Wiggins as that third piece because your first 2 pieces are 2 top 100 level hitters, one being league ready, one being upside swing. Then Jackson Wiggins, for the White Sox, you get a chance to mold a really high upside arm. It's a risky arm for sure, but Wiggins is a guy that made, he pitched 59 innings this year and had 71 strikeouts, walked too many guys, but generally has a really nice fastball, upper 90s fastball that has a lot of movement to it and could be an elite pitch if he's able to locate it more. And he pairs it with, a plus slider that is very legit, in addition to a curveball changeup as well. Wiggins is a guy that you take, he was a second rounder? Yeah, he was a second rounder in 2023. That's a guy you take and you add him to your pitching stable and you mold him and you see what happens, and it's fun and it's exciting, in addition to two hitters that you can really have be cornerstone prospects.
I want to ask you about two other Cubs prospects.
Yeah.
One is Ballesteros, and the other is their number 2 prospect, Cam Smith.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for sure. Cam Smith, I don't think there's any way they trade. He was their first rounder this year, and he immediately just ascended through the farm system. When you draft a guy in the first round and he puts up 1,000 OPS in his first 30 career games, you're probably not trading him. He already made it to AA at the end of the season. It's possible, and I get from the perspective of like they don't have a spot for him, then maybe. Right. But I just don't think you trade a first rounder who immediately took off the way he took off. That's why I didn't even include him in this package at all. Ballesteros is an interesting one. I've been a little bit of a hater of Ballesteros for a while now, because I think when you look at a 5'7" catcher, it's really hard to believe that. It's hard to believe that that's a profile. He seems like he's getting better behind the plate, and he's done nothing but mash. He's done nothing but hit. He hit really well in the Arizona Fall League. He just has continued to hit. But at the same time, I have a hard time believing it. I think he probably shifts to first base, and then you've got a first base DH. He's probably more of a DH than anything, honestly. So you've got a 5'7" first baseman who DHs, and then it's I just don't love the profile. I think it's possible, but I think ultimately the Cub, he's the type of player where I feel like no matter what, the way he's been hitting, you're not going to get full value for him because of that profile, in which case the Cubs would rather just keep him and make him a utility DH first baseman guy on their roster who can platoon, he can swap out, he can pinch hit, he kind of can be that kind of versatile offense first type of player. So I just don't see him being the most logical trade candidate. I think Casey's the guy where you're really getting value back for. And for the Cubs, Crochet would make their rotation one of the better rotations in baseball, honestly.
So just a couple of quick questions for you. One is, I thought it was someone from, maybe it was Aram, someone from Just Baseball who proposed a 3-way trade.
Yeah, that was Aram, yeah.
With Alec Baum coming to the
This was a funky one. Yeah, that's an interesting one. For people that want to check it out, the JustBB_media on Twitter is where that trade was posted, and it got a ton of traction online because Arm mentioned it on the Just Baseball show on the podcast, and it became like this super, Phillies fans are like, no way ever will we do this, and then, this and that, and people just reacted to mock trades like crazy. But that trade was interesting because it was Crochet going to the Phillies, it was Bohm going to the Mariners, and it was the White Sox getting 5 prospects from both teams, basically. So both teams giving prospects to get an addition in a spot they needed. It was a pretty loaded package, to be honest. I think it was honestly, it was definitely depth over headline, right? There wasn't that headline piece, but Eduardo Tait, who we mentioned, was kind of the headliner per se. And then it was Tait, it was Justin Crawford, and it was Mick Abel from the Phillies. And then it was Ty Pete and Michael Arroyo from the Mariners. So it was 5 prospects, which I don't really see a way the White Sox get 5 prospects, but it's definitely possible. It's an interesting deal, though. I mean, it basically would be, Crawford being near league ready outfielder, Arroyo being a league ready infielder, and then you're banking on upside pieces in Ty Pete, who's a shortstop, and Eduardo Tait, who's a catcher. So you're basically getting 2 near-ready guys that are probably more platoon players, average starters, and then you're getting 2 upside guys, and then you're getting a pitcher as well, who Mick Abel was a former top prospect who has struggled lately, but, a moldable, exciting pitcher who could shift to a high-leverage bullpen role if it doesn't work as a starter maybe. So interesting deal there. I'm glad you mentioned that was a fascinating one. And I don't really see the Mariners getting involved in a big trade like that, but at the same time, it's possible. And I think the Phillies are a team to watch because as much as I mentioned that they probably was my least favorite of these 5 offers we went through, the Phillies are hungry. They're going to make moves for sure. Yeah. The Phillies also, this is another thing that I want to mention because I talked to James Fox about this a little bit, I think a while back, but the Phillies are the one team I could see proposing a package deal of a Crochet and a Luis Robert. I don't think there's many teams that could do that. I don't think there's many teams that could afford it. And I don't think there's many teams that need a center fielder badly enough to do it, even with Robert kind of being at a lower point in his value. The Phillies could. I could see a world where the Phillies say, you know what, you want Aiden Miller? You get Aiden Miller, but we need Luis Robert. Aiden Miller, I mean, is it everybody I just mentioned plus Aiden Miller in that Phillies deal, right? Aiden Miller, Eduardo Tait, Starling Caba, maybe Justin Crawford as well, right? If they say just screw it, we'll give you our 2nd through 4th best, 5th best prospects. We want both those guys. It's possible. It's possible.
And Dombrowski,
it's Dave Dombrowski.
Easily.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
We're winding down. We're running
Yeah.
out of time a little bit, so I wanted to put you on the spot a little bit. And so,
Yeah.
number one, when do you think a deal's going to happen? And what? And then maybe percentage wise, what percent do you
Yeah.
think either of these would have a chance of coming to fruition?
Yeah. I think my initial reaction would probably be I think once one of those big guys signs, we're going to see this happen quickly. I think once a Burns or a Snell or a Fried signs a big deal, then it's going to move. And I think that's going to be probably winter meetings or maybe a little after the winter meetings. I think maybe things start to matriculate over the winter meetings. It eventually happens a week later, maybe. But I do think it's before the end of 2024. I honestly do. I really think this is going to happen in the next month and a half. I just think it's going to come down to how the pitching market shakes out and then which teams are willing to really go in. It's hard. It's really tricky to predict when. And I do think it depends on those big three pitchers because beyond those big three, Crochet is definitely better than every other free agent reliever pitcher in terms of like what their upside presents, right? Jack Flaherty's going to get a good bag. Sean Manaea is going to get a good bag. But beyond those three big guys, Crochet is definitely the next best option, readily available, right? So I think once one or two of those guys signs, then we're going to see this really happen because X team is going to realize, hey, we're not going to get Burns or Fried. Let's go get a Garrett Crochet. Let's not waste any more time, right? I think my favorites are Boston and LA. I think Boston and LA make the most sense. I think they're both willing to do what it takes to get a good pitcher this offseason. I think they both have the right types of prospects for this deal. I think you could swap in and out a lot of those guys I mentioned in the proposed trades, and you could still make a deal happen with either of those teams. Those are my two favorites. There's some dark horses too I should mention in the article. I did write some honorable mentions. I didn't do proposed trades for them, but I honorable mentioned the Mets, the Rangers, and the Nationals. I think those are all kind of interesting ideas. I think the Mets are more likely to just spend in free agency because it's Steve Cohen. He's willing to spend whatever it takes. So I do think the Mets are way more likely to sign one of those big guys than they are to trade for one. The Rangers, I think it makes sense from the lens of them needing pitching that's affordable. They need pitching, but they need affordable pitching. So I think it makes sense in that regard. But I also don't think they're necessarily a team that's going to make a huge move this offseason. I think they need to just kind of regather and recalibrate their roster right now. And the Nationals, it's a year too early, but it would be really, really, really fun. That would be a trade that I really wanted to mock, and I couldn't justify putting it in the top five. But that team would just be awesome because they offensively are trending in a very good direction with Dylan Cruz and James Wood outfield and a lot of other guys there in their system. They need some pitching though. It's a year too early for the Nationals. But if you were to revisit this in a year from now with a different pitcher, I think they'd be very much in the market for a huge pitching trade. So those teams are good to mention too. But I do think Boston and LA are the most likely. I think I'd give it about a 40 to 50% chance it's one of those two. I think that's where I'm at right now. I think the Cubs can play for sure. I think the Phillies are in play for a blockbuster one way or another this offseason. The Orioles, I have a hard time believing it with the Orioles.
Yeah.
I put them in here because they make the most sense logically. When you think about it, the Orioles need pitching. They have too many prospects. They need pitching. I don't believe that team. Something about me I'm just done. I'm done believing that they're going to do anything. Like I feel like I've been believing it for 2 years and they don't do it. And I think they're going to end up signing a Yusei Kikuchi and calling it a day. And that's going to be their move. And it's like, I don't believe it. So I think Boston and LA are my top two for sure.
Well, I think in your article you hit the nail on the head. The Orioles, what was their big trade deadline move? Trevor Rogers. That kind of says where their head's probably at.
Yeah. I think they'll do something, but I think they're going to go for one of those mid-tier reliever, starters in free agency, right? Nathan Eovaldi, maybe, right? They say, hey, Eovaldi, you can plug a hole for 2 years and be decent, and good for them. That'd be a good move. Yeah. But I just can't see them pulling the trigger on a huge trade. So I do, yeah. I'd say my order would be Boston first, LA second, maybe the Cubs third. The Phillies or Cubs are kind of close there in that third spot, I think.
Yeah.
What do you like? I ask you, what if you were to say if all five of these offers were on the table right now and you had to say pick which one and say boom, done, deal?
I tell you, I really like the Boston deal because you're getting two major league ready outfielders.
Yep. Close to it.
I think worst case, one of them is going to be league average and the other is going to be above league average. And I think that's worst case.
Yeah, I honestly think that's about right.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm glad. I hope you enjoyed going through these. I appreciate you kind of coming in and bouncing these ideas back and forth with me. So this is a cool way to look at it. I think, I think we are at the point now where we believe Crochet is going to get traded. Now it just comes down to what does that look like? So very curious to see how it shakes out. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. We're all excited to see kind of how it goes. And it's going to be, a pretty fun offseason. I know people are still kind of scared the White Sox are going to mess it up and this and that and whatever, but I'm just excited to see what happens. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun time of year.
100%. We will be back with more stuff. We're going to have some good interviews coming up. It's going to be, really exciting to just dive into stuff, get into all of it, keep after it. We will be back, the rest of the offseason. We're going to have some cool interviews set up. I think we're going to try and get some special guests on here. I'm going to do some player interviews coming up soon, and we'll keep it rolling on the Future Sox Roundup the rest of the offseason.
All right, man.
Thanks,
Have
Jeff.
a good holiday.